welcome everyone to the official unveiling dedication ceremony for our newest marker in honor of our beloved Ava Gardner. And everybody knows me, right? I'm Todd Johnston, by the way.
Hi, Todd. Of course, everybody knows you.
And I just have to say a special thank you to Chad Ward, the fire chief here at Brogdon, who allowed us to encroach on his Saturday morning, and also his space here, and he moved the fire trucks out so we could be out of the rain. See all the rain out there. But we just didn't want to take any chances, and this is much nicer. I would also like to start off by recognizing the Ava Gardner Museum board members that we have present. So if you'll raise your hands, if you're Ava Gardner Museum board, very good. Emeritus,
I can be an emeritus.
honorary, I guess that's me too. So we're all glad to be here. And the Johnston County Heritage Commission, Warren gets to raise his hand again. And Matt. So we had Frank Knott. So we have 3 of our Johnston County Heritage Commission members. I don't think we have anybody from the Johnston County Visitors Bureau here, but they were the 3 sponsors of the marker. So we're very grateful for that. Everything you do requires money. It takes money, and when we pool our resources, we can make good things happen. And this is one example. I also want to recognize Beth Cannon because her mother, Doris Cannon, was really the founder, along with Tom and Lorraine Banks, was the founder of the Ava Gardner Museum in this house across the road 40-some years ago, I guess it was. I know it's over 40 years ago because I remember when I was a freshman in college, my wife and I had one of our very first dates at the Ava Gardner Museum. Yes, people say, yeah, you really know how to show a girl a good time. One Friday night, we were looking for something to do. I said, I've been wanting to go down and visit Tom and Lorraine Banks. They've been inviting me to come and see their museum down on the other side of Smithfield. And I didn't know how far it was down the other side of Smithfield. But we drove and we drove and drove, and we finally found it. And they were so gracious. It was a Friday night, but they welcomed us in to their home museum. And it was a great experience. And so that's where it all started before the Bankses passed away and the museum moved to Smithfield, and the rest is history. But I just wanted to point out the role of Doris Cannon in getting all of this off the ground. And I do remember when I was a teenager working at the public library in Smithfield, I remember the first time Tom and Lorraine Banks came to Smithfield and said, we've got this collection, we've got all this stuff related to Ava Gardner, and we want to do something with it. We want to, display it here at the library. That was before they even thought about doing a museum. So I remember, some of you may remember, I bet you were there, when they had the Ava Gardner Day at the library. It was in the early 80s or around 1980.
What's it, 70?
Well, maybe it was 79. It was 79 or 80.
They got connected, 79.
Right. But we had a whole Saturday devoted to Ava. Jack and Elsie Mae and Inez were all still alive at that time. This is very informal, as you can tell. We want people to feel free to share memories. But I have asked a couple of people to start us off, and I want Joe to come and say something on behalf of the Ava Gardner Museum Board, and then he'll be followed by Ava Thompson, who's going to share some memories from the family, and then the rest of you will have an opportunity, if you would like, to share a special memory of the museum, the teacherage, or Ava. So, Joe, you're next.
Thank you, Todd. Well, on behalf of the museum and the family, definitely thanks to the sponsors and Todd. We wouldn't be anywhere even close to this situation if it weren't for Todd. Todd has been probably one of the largest impacts on Ava's life after she was gone that there could be, along with Tom and Lorraine Banks, the founders of the museum, and Doris. So there's been a lot of good people that has preceded all of us, and those are big shoes to fill. So that we wouldn't even be standing in this building if it weren't for that house, because Tom kind of made this building happen as well, this fire department. But yeah, you know, Ava lived a mile down the road. She was born a mile down the road, and then moved down here, and then to Virginia, and then to Rock Ridge. You know, so she had quite a few places before Hollywood, but this is the place she called her home. So these are where a lot of her formative years were spent. So it's about time that this has happened, and we're all very thankful for it, and very happy that everybody could come out, and those people that really care and really mean a lot to the museum and the trust and everything to spend time talking about this stuff. So I only have one real memory of Ava Gardner, and it was when I was about 4 or 5 years old, is when she came to Mama Creech's house, Elsie Mae, her older sister, and we went down there, and I just remember her voice, and she brought a tape recorder, and that was pretty cool. So me and my brother were stuck on this tape recorder, and just, you know, smelling perfume and cigarette smoke the whole time. It was like, you know, and listening to her chatting with Mama Creech and all those. So, but didn't really understand what fame was or any of that stuff. We just knew that, you know, she was on TV sometimes, and she was cool, and she was our aunt, and we didn't get to see her too often, but it was always good to see her. Everybody talked about her. So that's really the only memory I have. But I really appreciate everybody coming, and again, Todd, for putting all this together, and the museum and the Visitors Bureau, and everybody, the Heritage Center and everything, for putting all this stuff together. So thanks so much, Todd. Thanks, everybody.
Ava said that she had a very happy childhood, and it was spent right here in this area at approximately a decade. And I think that Ava was about 2 when Mama Gardner and Ava and I guess Myra moved into the teacherage. And those teachers, Todd and I think there were about 8 of them, according to the 1930 census, just showered little Ava with loving attention. And she grew up to believe that teaching was the very best of all of the professions. Those teachers helped to groom her. They entertained her with stories, and they even let her sit in their classes at the school before she started to school herself. She was a flower girl in the Jordan wedding, and because she had such a close association with the teachers who lived across the road, she grew to hold teaching in the highest regard. As late as 1988, when Ava was talking with her ghostwriter for her book, her autobiography, Ava My Story, she told him that she had a great niece who was named for her, the daughter of Al, her nephew, and she was a teacher. Now, by that time, I was an assistant principal in Wake County, and then I came to Johnston County as the principal of the flagship high school here. And of course, Ava knew about that, but that was secondary to the fact that I had spent a little over a decade in a high school English classroom. So, you know, that is just one influence from the teacherage on Ava Gardner. Almost every characteristic of her later life I can trace back to the decade she spent at the teacherage. For example, when the 2-story brick Brogdon School still existed directly across the road here, they had a black janitor. And Ava, if she saw him, and she was frequently on the school grounds, she would always run up to him and give him a hug. there was a black lady who helped Mama Gardner with the meals and the cleaning and the teacherage, and she had little ones. Ava played with her children. One of her daughters, Virginia, was Ava's best friend. They slept in the same bed if they were having an overnight slumber party. Ava ate meals at Virginia's house. As a matter of fact, Bappy said that if Ava was missing and they couldn't find her, they'd go to this black lady's house, and Ava would be the only little white face sitting at the dinner table. So Ava grew up to be progressive and not progressive in today's media, but she had views about civil rights that were progressive for her era. It was approached being a moral imperative for Ava for everyone to be treated with dignity and respect and have equality under the law. And I trace that back to the years she spent at the teacherage that the Heritage Center and the museum and the Visitors Bureau has now made a part of history, and we're all grateful for that. And then it was the Great Depression, but in little crossroads communities like this, all over eastern North Carolina, people thrived in some cases, but they certainly got by. And in some cases they thrived because they were generous with one another and they worked together within their community. They took care of each other. And Ava grew up to be a very generous and charitable person, having contributed almost $2 million to her in U.S. money to her beneficiaries since 1986. So I believe that in addition to leaving a legacy of joy, that she left a legacy of giving. And where did that come from? The teacherage. And when I say teacherage, I think of this whole area because by 1930, my grandmother, Elsie May, had a country store here. The school building was here. The water tower was here. Papa Gardner had a sawmill behind the school, and Ava loved to play in the wood chips. So when I think teacherage, I think of this whole little corner, this little community, like so many others in eastern North Carolina. Todd, you want me to wrap it up here?
You're fine.
I could talk forever about Ava. One memory triggers another, but every family has its favorite stories. The stories that are told when families get together, Thanksgiving and Christmas and other holidays. And no one tells the stories, the favorite stories, like the sisters did. We all know the story of Ava climbing the water tower, which we believe was probably 70 feet. I mean, it was way up there for a 6 or a 7-year-old. But nobody can tell it like Bappy and Onions, because they were the ones that went out there and talked so calmly and sweetly to coax her down. And then when they got her on the ground, they gave her a whooping. But I could just see that, Morgan is, Inez is, wave your hand, Morgan. Morgan is from Raleigh, Morgan Grimes, and he is Inez's grandson, yeah. And She was all business. She was the consummate matriarch. But Bappy, she was just all over the place, just really unpredictable, and she could play about any role. And I can just see those two coaxing little 6 or 7-year-old Ava step by step down the water tower. But the rumor is that she did it on a dare, and it was those Lee boys. Now, I am sure the Lee boys, and I'm not casting any aspersions on the Lee family, I'm sure they were rough, tough little farm boys like existed all over the area. But now in Ava's young days, they were a real menace and a force to be dealt with. So of course she had to accept the dare, but more than that, now to use the vernacular here, those were the boys that taught her how to cuss, and I want to pronounce this very precisely, and spit, and fight. As a matter of fact, and this is another favorite story of the family, when the Lee boys won all of my dad, Al Creech's marbles, Ava, being his defender, jumped in there and played and won them all back, and that made the Lee boys really angry. And they jumped up and said, "That's not fair, give them back." Ava said, "Make me." So, typical of the happy childhood, the happy childhood spent right here. And this was a wonderful place, I'm sure, for her to grow up. My grandmother lived right next door. She had a country store on the other side of the teachridge, and I would spend weekends with her. Before I started to school, I would spend the night with her, and I would play through all of this area. They didn't lock schools back in those days, so I would go into school and get on the stage and have little skits and things, and I had a BB gun, and I would wander around and shoot at the birds in the trees and shoot at the bottles and cans in the trash pile behind my grandmother's store, and it was just an idyllic place for a child to be. And so I can only imagine, when Ava says she had a happy childhood, I can only imagine what it was like. But as a 6 or 7-year-old, the water tower was still here. I would look up, I would shake my head. No way, not climbing it. Alrighty, well, I enjoyed sharing with you, and I'll give it back to Todd.
Thank you, Ava. I love hearing these stories, and every time I hear a different one that I've not heard before.
All right. My husband says I could talk to a fence post, so when it gets too long, just motion, I'll just sit down. I never met Ava Gardner, but when I was growing up, my mother had an Ava Gardner scrapbook. My mother was nuts about the movies, and she was nuts about movie stars. Now, she would tell you that her favorite movie star was, and she always said Bet. She never said Betty Davis. She always said Bet Davis. But that was her favorite. But she had scrapbooks on Shirley Temple, Greer Garson, and Ava Gardner. Now, she didn't have anything of value in any of those scrapbooks, but she bought all those 10 and 15 and 25-cent movie magazines that were so prevalent in the 40s and into the 50s. And so I loved to look at that scrapbook. But I never thought of being involved with the Ava Gardner Museum. My mother's oldest, my mother was born at Brockton, and my mother's oldest sister, Kathleen, was in Ava's class in school. Now, she would tell you she was not Ava's best friend, and I can't think of that girl's name. Do you remember who was Ava's best friend?
Clara Tyner.
Thank you, Clara Tyner, exactly. So, in the 70s, I was living in Minnesota because that's where my husband is from. But we came home for a summertime visit, and somehow, I don't know how this all got arranged, but my Aunt Katie came from Greensboro, where she was living, And Clara Tyner came, and I guess it must have been in the late, well, maybe it was the 80s, now that I think about it. Because we moved, well, trying to think when I moved back. I moved back here in 79, so it must have been in the 80s that we came out here. But Clara Tyner came and met us. And so this was Tom and Lorraine's thing. I don't remember meeting Doris or anything at that time. But I just remember it was hotter than Hades in that house. They had fans sitting on the floor, and all the paper that was laminated and thumbtacked to the walls and to these display boards was blowing in the breeze. There were costumes you could walk up and touch. And people, well, they didn't offer me that opportunity, but yeah, I heard there were people wearing them at times. But anyway, we had our picture taken on the front porch of the Heritage, of the Teachridge. And I said that didn't happen because I didn't remember it. But Tom and Lorraine kept scrapbooks of all their visitors. And after we moved into the first home of the museum in Smithfield, the Austin building, Doris one day produced some of those photograph books. And on about the second page of the book she handed me, there I stood with my mother and my Aunt Katie and Clara Tyner. So that's my first real memory of the Ava Gardner Museum as such. In 1991, at Christmas, there was an appeal in the Smithfield Herald for people to get involved with the Ava Gardner Museum. They were really trying to make something of the museum. By that time, Tom and Lorraine had died, and of course Ava. And the museum had moved into town, but there really wasn't, it just was such a fledgling effort. And so I don't know, it just appealed to me. And so in January of 1992, I came down to the museum, and I cannot remember the lady's name who had been hired as the docent, but the museum was open. I know it didn't open during the week till Wednesdays. I don't remember all the days it was open, but I became the Saturday volunteer over time. But to begin with, Norwood Worley had his furniture store across the street. And he was the mayor of Smithfield, which I'm not sure if he was the mayor at that moment. But anyway, if you came into Smithfield and you wanted to go to the Ava Gardner Museum on a day it wasn't open, you could go across the street to Worley Furniture Company, or whatever it was called, and Mr. Worley would come over and open it up for you and let you go inside. But anyway, I tried to learn more about Ava, and the lady that was in charge of the museum, when people came in, you would take a little group and you had to guide them around, because we really truly were Grandma's attic. Nothing was labeled, and it was just such a hodgepodge of anything that Tom and Lorraine had related to Ava. And so, as I would be taking someone around, I would glance back over at this lady, and sometimes she would be smiling, and I think, oh, I got that right. And other times she'd sort of purse her lips and think, oh shoot, what did I say that was wrong? And I would hope that whoever I was talking to didn't realize it. But it was as small of an effort as it was to have a museum at that point. To me, those were such good days, because, as you might have gathered already, I like to talk. And so I really enjoyed interacting with all the people that came. They were grateful to know about Ava, without anyone ever being rude or ugly about anything they might have read, because a lot of things were misrepresentations, as you well know. But people were kind, and they were interested, and those days were just a lot of fun. I remember when Ron Owens was the town manager, and he saw the benefit to Smithfield of an Ava Gardner Museum. He hung Ava's portrait in the town hall, and he had the tagline, "Home of the Ava Gardner Museum," added to the town stationery. And I can remember sitting on metal folding chairs in the old Austin building, and with Ron's help, we got incorporated as the Ava Gardner Museum. We established some bylaws to operate as a board of directors. And the museum began to feel like it might really go someplace. And of course, I'm sorry that Donna Bailey Taylor is not here today, because she, in addition to Doris and everything that Doris did in the beginning, and her involvement was always so critical. But without Donna and her expertise in helping to deal with contractors, and without Doug Fisher, who was the designer of so much of the early museum as it exists today, we wouldn't be there. I mean, other people came on board, and I look around at so many faces here are not as well known to me as some others, but there have just been some very special people in the life of the Ava Gardner Museum. And I like to think that Ava, wherever she is, that she's smiling about all of this. I think probably, in my mind, never having met her, sometimes I think she might think we're all a little nuts, but at the same time, I hope that she would, I hope she, if such a thing is possible, that she feels gratified that her life still means something to people in this area and continues to mean something to people in this country and truly all around the world, because there are still people who come from all points of the globe to find out more about Ava. I'm a hush now.
All right, who else would like to have something to say?
I can say a quick word.
All right, please.
Gotta be quick.
And this is Morgan Grimes, Ava's great nephew, grandnephew, right?
Exactly. So I'll try to be brief. I don't have anything prepared, but I'm Inez's youngest of 6 grandchildren, so I didn't know her that well. She probably Ava knew me better than I knew her, from being a child when she came in the 70s. When she came in the 80s a couple times, she actually visited Myra in Winston-Salem. I think she was doing Knots Landing around 85. And we got to visit, and I got to walk around the block with her as she smoked a couple cigarettes. But so that was always a good memory. But just the whole family. When I came to Smithfield for Christmas or whatever, it was always stories. And Billy Grimes would always. That's my dad's oldest brother, so Inez's son. Would talk for, if you think you're a talker, Billy would outdo anyone, I promise you that. We just sat and listened, so he had great stories about Edna May, who was probably, my favorite great aunt, just because I saw her the most. She was funny. My cousin Karen would always want her to sit on her when she came. And so there was a story about, I guess, I'm sure I'll butcher this, but Elsie Mae had lent a farmer during the Great Depression some flour, and she gave great latitude, and he still hadn't paid her back, so she called him up and said, "No, I can't pay you today." So she went in and went to his house and got the biscuits they had made. So Billy has some great stories about when he was up in New York visiting Ava and Frank, and there's a story. I can't tell it all because probably not the right audience. But when it came down to, well, we got younger children in the audience. But basically, what it came down to, literally, Billy had spent the day at an opera, and Frank had spent the day cutting a record. And when they got home, Ava was, I guess, in a mood, and she said, "Where have y'all been?" XYZ. And Billy was like, "I've been up to the opera." And Frank said, "I've been cutting a record." She said, "You guys are full of." So, that a lot of things. There's a lot of people not believing things in my life, like when I did walk around the block with her in Winston-Salem the next day at school. "Where were you yesterday?" "I was just, hanging out with Ava Gardner." "Yeah, right." And bittersweet, but when Ava died, I was in college at Carolina, and I remember my English class, English Lit. If you miss more than 3 days, you would get a half grade off. And I'd already missed 3 days, and I needed to go to the funeral. So I had to bring in an excuse why I didn't make it. So I brought in the USA Today and said, "This is why I couldn't make it," and he didn't believe me. So a lot of good stories. Great. I'm so honored that everyone is so interested in her life. I'm sure, knowing what I know about her and you all know about her, she didn't like a lot of fuss about her, but I'm sure she would be so honored in all this. So thank you.
And after we do the unveiling, feel free to come and have pictures made. I definitely want the Ava Museum Board and the Gardner family members and anybody who wants to have your picture made with the marker, please do so. So I'm going to ask our youngest 2 Avas who are here if they will please come and do the honors.